Hello, I'm Ms. Breeze. I'm obviously a Giants fan. Don't at me, it's been a rough few years. But I want to talk to you about this book that I read over the summer, Stealing Home by Eric Nussbaum. Now, it is a book about the Dodgers. Its full title is Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and the Lives Caught in Between. And you may be like, why would a Giants fan want to read about the Dodgers? The thing is, I think anyone who's a fan of baseball should read this book because it forces you to think more deeply about not just how your teams came to be and how the facilities they play in came to be, but also like how we mythologize sports in America. And when we mythologize them, like who pays that price, who's left behind, and at what cost. I'm going to read a brief excerpt from you because this is just in like his foreword that he wrote, but I think it's what hooked me into the book. I think if you're a baseball fan, you'll recognize yourself in this. When I think about growing up in Los Angeles, I don't think about going to the beach, the mall, or the movies. I think about making that rush hour drive to a Dodger game. I think about getting there late and catching the first inning on the radio, Vin Scully, in simulcast. I think about buying a scalper ticket or a $6 bleacher seat, and I think about how I never felt more at home in my city than I did there, among tens of thousands of perfect strangers. I think about how silly it is that for millions of us, civic identity is tied up in something as tenuous as a baseball team. Then I think that it's not silly at all, that baseball does have magical powers, or at least it can, and that our caring is what gives it those powers. I think about the long walk back to the car and the slow crawl out of the parking lot and the stadium lights receding into the darkness. Like I said, I think anyone who's a baseball fan can kind of see themselves in that paragraph. But I wanted to point out one thing he mentioned in there, and that is the idea that our caring is what gives us these powers. It's what gives baseball this power. And if you're a baseball fan or just a general sports fan, you're going to see people in here that you recognize. You're going to see stories about Sandy Koufax and Jackie Robinson. But I think that this book is good for anyone who is interested in history, especially if you're interested in American history, because that idea of like what we give power is key to understanding American history, right? It's all about power. It's about who has it and who doesn't. So you're also going to meet people in this book who you haven't heard of before. You're going to meet the Artechiga family who lived in the areas that became Chavez Ravine and then became Dodger Stadium. You're going to meet a guy named Frank Wilkerson who had big dreams about what could be, about imagining a better world, and then saw all of those destroyed. You're going to meet families who owned their land and built houses with their hands that they lived in for decades, that they saw their children grow up in and their children's children's grow up in. They did everything you're supposed to do, right, to achieve the American dream. But they lost, and Dodger Stadium now stands in the place where they once lived. And in that way, I think that this story isn't just about baseball, isn't just about sports. It's really about the way that we mythologize our own history as a country and as a nation, and asking ourselves what's buried beneath the surface of that, who gets left behind, who gets left out of those stories is really important to understanding the reality of the situation that we're in even today. Um, American history over and over again is really about who gets to call themselves American, who gets to stand there and say, this is my land, this belongs to me, you don't get to take it. And some people have been successful and they have won that argument, and so many have lost. And the families that you'll meet in this book are definitely ones who lost their land, lost their homes, and lost in a lot of ways what they thought they had achieved, and that is the American dream. As I said, I recommend it for anyone who is a baseball fan. I recommend it for anyone who is a sports fan because it causes you to think a bit more deeply about what sports mean to our history and how they can both be a thing that like helps us cope and entertains us in really difficult times, but they can also be something that can be a weapon that people in power can kind of use against you and use against vulnerable people. I can't recommend this book enough. The writing is amazing. It is a little bit tricky when he switches perspectives a bit, but I think that that's super key in understanding all the different stories that are contained in this one beautiful stadium on a hill. Happy to talk with you about it. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me. But highly recommend Stealing Home, Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and the Lives Caught in Between by Eric Nussbaum.